of my previous videos, you remember I spoke about how Iran is gradually pushing America out of the Middle East, where we discussed the concept of A2/AD, anti-access slash aerial denial. You see, that A2/AD is not just happening in the Middle East. It is now starting to happen in Europe. Let me explain. You see, the A2/AD that happened to America from the hands of Iran, in the Middle East, particularly in the Persian Gulf countries, happened due to military pressure, missiles, drones, all the sorts. However, the immediate ring around Iran, when it comes to the military ecosystem for America, is, the Persian Gulf countries and the other Middle East countries. But there's an outer ring. That outer ring is largely Europe. And then the outermost ring, the farthest ring, is largely, the continental US itself. Now, as part of the outer ring, you have Diego Garcia. Remember Diego Garcia? That particular territory that is about 4,000, 5,000 kilometers away from continental Iran, that Iran was suspected to have attacked with 2 ballistic missiles, a few weeks ago, although unsuccessfully. That is part of the so-called European, ecosystem, the outer ring as against the innermost Persian Gulf versus Middle East, inner ring. You also have military bases, actually NATO military bases in countries like the UK, in countries like Germany, in countries like France, in countries like Italy, and other, European countries like that. So the moment Iran started pressuring America out of the inner ring, America moved to the next best thing, the outer ring. However, A2/AD, anti-access slash area denial, is now starting to happen in the European countries too. However, it is not happening this time due to military pressure of Iran. It is happening due to economic pressure. Again, let me explain. You see, when Iran sucked off between 10 to 12 effective million barrels out of the daily 100 million barrels that go into the global, oil market, every day, according to analysts, the chokiest victims will be Asia. After Asia, Africa. After Africa, Europe. And after Europe, America and the Americans. According to them, Asia will feel the bite first. Africa next, Europe next, and then America last. Again, let me explain. You see, Asia will feel it most because Asia is largely an energy-hungry continent. Energy-hungry in the sense that the vast majority of the hydrocarbon reserves in the world, the crude oil, the gas, and all sorts. Almost no Asian country, is able to extract any hydrocarbon of consequence from its territory. That means that they will continue to depend, on other countries of the world who are hydrocarbon rich for their hydrocarbons. Unfortunately, or should I say fortunately, Asia is also the factory of the world. You cannot mess with China when it comes to world production. You cannot mess with Japan, you cannot mess with South Korea, and even India, you cannot mess with them. All of them are relatively energy hungry country. However, the vast bulk of the energy traditionally comes from the Persian Gulf countries, which the supply to them of which Iran has blocked by blocking the Strait of Hormuz. That puts them in a very tight and a very difficult situation. So they are not just dealing with issues of scarcity, they are also dealing with issues of they are not just dealing with issues of price in terms of the high price. They are now also dealing with issues of scarcity, unavailability. So the pinch is serious. Pakistan is in deep shit. Japan is going down. South Korea is very hungry for fuel and all sorts. Africa is supposed to feel the pinch next. However, there is some good news. Dangote refinery in Nigeria has largely ameliorated the pressure, at least when it comes to West Africa. You see, if there were no Dangote refinery, it means Africa may not suffer from scarcity of crude. But what do you do with crude Crude is not is a useless when it comes to powering your jet engines, when it comes to powering your planes, when it comes to powering your cars and your industries. You must refine fuel. Africa used to have near zero or at least very little refining capacity. So we will have had to depend on external countries for refined fuel. And because there is scarcity, they will hold on to their refined fuel, and Africa will have started suffering in the midst of plenty. However, because of the incursion into the market of the particularly gargantuan Dangote refinery, Nigeria, for example, may be dealing with issues of price of a rise in the prices of fuel, but there is certainly no scarcity when it comes to Nigeria and when it comes to immediate west. In fact, Dangote is even getting to supply jet fuel and some other petroleum products to even European countries, to even continental America. So thank God for Dangote. Up next is Europe. Europe is in serious trouble at this time. Again, Europe is energy hungry. Europe is a net consumer of energy. Absolutely little capacity, except Norway, a very, very little in the UK and Scotland. But generally, again, Europe is very energy hungry. Again, a lot of the energy happen to come from the Middle East. And this is the same Europe that is supposed to host President Trump's military bases to prosecute war against Iran, after Iran has pushed, the US substantially out of the Persian Gulf, the inner ring, like I said. So this is Europe needing oil, the UK, France, Italy, Germany, and some other countries. And this is the same Europe that America needs to prosecute war, with Iran. So there's a trouble in paradise scenario here. And one after the other, the European countries started doing what? Started pulling out of President Trump's orbit. Italy came up and said, okay, they are not going to be allowing America to use its bases, or to use its airspace to go on to attack Iran out of the blues. Spain was actually the first country that went completely, amok on Trump and said, no military bases for you, no airspace for you. In fact, President Trump actually threatened the Prime Minister of Spain that they are going to use their military bases whether they like it or not. Do you know what he said? He said, we will cut power to our military bases and we will see what you will do. That is how bad the situation has become. The UK too is starting to vacillate, and there's some other European countries. One very interesting thing happened yesterday. What happened? At the floor of the United Nations Security Council, Bahrain brought a motion supported by other Gulf countries. And the motion essentially is they want the UN Security Council to essentially unite and do a military attack, on Iran to wrest control of the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. Two countries, understandably, went against the motion and killed it very quickly. They are Russia and China, for obvious reasons. But one strange country joined them that almost never joins them, to agree to such a motion. And that country happened to be France. That is absolutely atypical, absolutely against the norm. For a country like France, that is a NATO ally, that is a prominent EU country, that is supposed to be an ironclad ally of both America and Israel, to go against a motion that goes against the interests, of America, Israel, and other European allies. Why? The question was only answered today, just before I came on this episode, on this session. And what did we hear? Bloomberg reported that for the very first time, since the war started on February 28, Iran allowed one French-flagged, a ship laden with oil to cross through the Strait of Hormuz onwards to France. Boys on the streets used to say, follow the money. This time around, it is follow the oil. France needed its oil badly. It needed it to pass through the Strait of Hormuz to safety in France. And in return, it essentially, at least overtly, did a diplomatic trade with Iran. Give us diplomatic support at the UN Security Council, and at least we will let you have one of your oil-laden ships. Can you understand now the political A2/AD that is starting to happen in Europe, as against the military A2/AD that is happening currently in the Middle East, the inner ring, as against the outer ring of Europe? I hope you learned something from this video today. Please let me have your comments. Let me have your questions. I would love to interact with my fantastic audience on the same platform. Again, remember to like, to share, to broadcast, to subscribe, and to interact with our videos on this same platform. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.